Hi. Today we are going to share a story where a boy comes to kill two vampire girls, but instead falls in love with them. The name of the movie is Night Teeth. So let's get started. At the beginning of the story, we learn that many years ago, humans and vampires lived together, and they survived by hunting each other. But after a few years, when humans and vampires realized that if they continued like this, they would all die, a treaty was made between these two communities. And in this treaty, 3 rules were fixed between them. The first rule of these rules was that vampires would not come among humans if they wanted to. And the second rule was that they could not drink the blood of a human against their will. And the last rule was that no vampire could enter the area of humans without permission. Then we see that in the middle of the night, John and Maria were driving somewhere. While driving for so long, John suddenly notices that someone is following them. John stops their car to see this. Then he sees that this is none other than a vampire named Victor. But he is not supposed to be here without permission. Then he realizes that something must have happened. So he drove quickly and went to his friend's hideout for help. But when John enters their hideout, he notices that there is no sound. So he very carefully enters slowly. But after entering, he sees that someone has killed all his friends and hung them. And seeing this, John gets quite nervous. He goes straight to the car. But when he returns to the car, John sees that Maria is not there. And seeing the car door broken, John understands that someone must have taken Maria away. And seeing all this, John becomes very worried. He goes straight to his brother. John's brother's name was Benny. And John says to his brother, "You have to drive my car for me for a day. I am going out of town for some work. If anyone asks you what your name is, then tell them John. And if you can do the job properly, then you will get a good amount of money." And so in the evening, Benny takes John's car and leaves. John actually used to work with some underworld gangsters. And so John used to follow the instructions given to him by the gang. And today, John's responsibility was to take 2 customers around the city by car. When he arrived at the specified place with the car, 2 girls named Jo and Belair got into his car. These 2 have rented Benny's car for tonight. Getting in the car, they give Benny the address of 5 clubs. And he tells him to take them around these 5 clubs all night and drop them off at the same place before morning. Now it is seen that the place where Benny has reached by car for the first time, it was a nightclub. On the other hand, John is seen standing in front of a picture. Actually, this picture was a scene of the treaty between vampires and humans. And then one of John's team comes to meet him. John tells him, "The treaty that was made between humans and vampires many years ago has ended. That means tomorrow morning either humans or vampires will survive." Then we see Benny again. Benny was sitting in the car outside the nightclub, waiting for his 2 customers. So while getting out of the car and looking around, suddenly, his eyes fall on the ground. Here a red stone-like coin was lying. Benny had already noticed that Jo and Belair were giving these coins while entering the club. After a while, Benny sees that Jo and Belair are coming out of the club, and they straight get into the car and tell Benny, "Let's go to the club." And then Benny goes straight to his next destination without saying anything. Then it is seen this is also a nightclub. After Jo and Belair entered the club, Benny was sitting alone in the car. He was getting very bored sitting alone in the car. So after a while, he starts reading a magazine. But even then, the time does not seem to pass at all. So he decides to call his brother John. But even after trying several times on the phone, John's phone does not ring. And then Benny looks back and sees that 2 bags are lying on the car seat, which Jo and Belair brought from the previous club. Benny gets a little interested and opens a bag to see what is inside it. But as soon as he opens the bag, he is surprised, because there were a lot of bundles of money and jewelry there. But when Benny was taking a bundle of money from there and looking at the money, he noticed that blood was laying on the money. Even some blood splattered on his face from there. And just then, he sees a police car coming from behind, and he gets a little scared by this incident. So he quickly enters the nightclub. And while entering the club, the receptionist stops him. But he gets permission to enter the club by giving the red coin in Benny's pocket. Then after coming up, when he enters a room, he sees a terrible sight. In front of him, Jo and Belair have tied 2 people, and they are drinking blood from the bodies of those 2 people. But suddenly, Benny arrives. Belair's donor dies while turning towards him. And seeing this, the other donor threatens them both and says, "According to the rules, you can drink blood, but you cannot kill any human. So you have now broken the rules. And if our boss comes to know about this, then you will not be able to survive." Then Jo gets angry and drinks more blood from that person. This also kills that person. But seeing such a scene in front of his eyes, Benny then runs down from there in fear. As soon as he comes down, he sees a police officer standing in front of his car. Benny goes straight to that officer. He tells him everything. But the officer acts as if he does not believe anything. The officer tells Benny, "You must have been intoxicated, and that is why you are talking such nonsense." Then he arrests Benny, and just then Jo and Belair arrive there. They tell the police officer from a distance, "He is our driver. Let him go." Actually, the police officer is a man of that vampire named Victor, and he knew everything about vampires. So Belair releases Benny at their words. Benny then realizes that the police here are also with the vampires. Realizing that the police cannot help him, Benny was then trying to message John with his phone, but Joe sees it, and after snatching the phone from Benny, he breaks it. She tells Benny, "You will stay with us until the work is finished." Next, we see Victor's house. In this house, Victor has imprisoned many people, and blood was automatically sucked from the bodies of all of them. After Victor, a vampire named Grace comes to meet the boss. Actually, the whole city was run by a few vampire bosses, and Grace is one of them. But when Victor arrives, it is seen that Grace was very angry with him, because since the night John's girlfriend was kidnapped, the treaty between vampires and humans has been broken. And so after everyone has been living peacefully for many years, suddenly unrest has broken out in the whole city. Victor then tries to explain to Grace that, "We are vampires, and more powerful than humans. Then why should we follow their rules? Because of these rules and regulations, it seems as if we are always hiding. Even in such a big city, we feel like prisoners in a jail." But Grace was not willing to listen to any of his words. Grace says, what if John and his team go after the vampires one by one? War will break out again between vampires and humans. And so Grace warns Victor. But when Victor realizes that Grace will not join his team at all, he kills Grace and her companion Eva. Meanwhile, Belair then says to Benny, "There are 5 bosses of us in this city, but Victor is not our boss. He has promised all the vampires that everyone will live freely. And so today our plan was to kill all the vampire bosses in the city, those who want to keep the treaty between humans and vampires alive. Then your brother John was also supposed to be killed, but today you came in place of your brother and saved him." Then we see John and his companions coming to the house of a vampire boss. Coming there, John sees that the condition of this vampire boss is already bad. John asks him, "Who has done this to you?" The boss says Victor is killing all the bosses in the whole city with 2 girls. Saying this, he wants to drink John's blood to fix himself, but before that, John shoots him and kills him. On the other hand, Benny has come to another club with Joe and Belair. While entering the club, Benny meets his college friends, but his friends were laughing at him because he is wearing a driver's dress and roaming around with 2 girls. And then suddenly Belair kisses Benny. Actually, she was trying to make Benny's friends understand that Benny is not a driver. He is with them. When Joe and Belair enter the club, suddenly the people of a group called Night Legend surround them. Actually, the people of the Night Legend group used to acknowledge vampires for many years, but now that all the treaties have ended, they have again started acknowledging the vampires. Just when they are about to kill Joe and Belair, Benny suddenly hits their leader on the head with a bottle. And taking this opportunity, Joe and Belair kill the rest of the members there. Then when they were leaving this club, John arrives there with his men. But he is disappointed to see his brother coming out of the club with 2 girls. Just as John is about to call Benny, a vampire comes in front of them and blocks their way. John gets angry and kills the vampire in front of everyone. Then it is seen that Benny has come to his house with Joe and Belair, because his hand was cut after attacking the boss of the club. After coming home, Belair bandages Benny's hand. Actually, Belair has started liking Benny. Then Joe gets a call from Victor. Victor wants to know how many bosses they have been able to kill. Belair says, "We have killed 4, and 1 is still left." Meanwhile, when John and his men were leaving the club and going somewhere else, a police car follows them. After going some distance, the police car stops them, and the police officer comes out of it and says to John, "Victor wants to talk to you. He is waiting for you at a restaurant." Hearing this, John comes to meet Victor at the restaurant. Victor then says to John, "The vampires who made a treaty with you are no longer alive, so from now on, whatever I say, that will happen. You will survive only if you follow my rules. Otherwise, you will die." John does not pay attention to his words and asks, "Where is my girlfriend, Maria?" Then Victor says with a smile, "The food I am eating now is Maria." Hearing this, John takes out his gun and shoots Victor in the head. But since Victor is a vampire, nothing happens to him. He then imprisons John. Meanwhile, Benny then comes with Joe and Belair to kill the last boss. The name of this boss was Rocco. When Joe goes inside to talk to Rocco, Benny and Belair were sitting outside and talking. Suddenly, Benny says, "Victor made me a vampire about 50 years ago, and since then I am like this, but I want to go back to normal life. I want to enjoy my life peacefully away from all this." Then Benny says, "I only have my brother John in this world. I have no one else in this world, and I also want that I should not lose my brother in these troubles." While saying all these things, they both get a little close. Then Belair says, "I didn't want to tell you one thing, but I am telling you, your brother John has been imprisoned by Victor." Meanwhile, Joe is keeping Rocco busy with sweet words. Then suddenly she attacks Rocco. But Rocco catches her. Then the other vampires with Rocco also attack Joe. And seeing this, Belair also enters. Within a short time, Joe and Belair finish their work and come out, but then the organization called Night Legend comes there, and they attack Belair. Then an arrow hits Joe's leg, and this arrow was a poisonous arrow, so Joe's condition starts to deteriorate slowly. In this situation, Benny takes them out of there safely in the car and brings them home. By this time, it is morning. Coming in front of Victor's house, Belair says, "Benny, you go now, because if you enter the house, Victor will kill you." Saying this, she enters the house with Joe, but since Benny has come to know that his brother is imprisoned here, he does not leave, and takes a baseball bat in his hand and enters the house. And there he sees that inside the house, people are imprisoned in many glass boxes. And there he sees his brother John too. When Benny sees his brother, he tries to break the glass with the pad in his hand. Then Victor comes from behind and catches him, and asks Joe and Belair why they didn't kill Benny. Belair is surprised to see Benny because she had told him to leave from here. Victor then says to Joe, "Kill him, because I need a lot of fresh blood." When Joe is about to kill Benny, Belair stops her and says, "Benny, but you saved your life, remember that." And then in the middle of their conversation, Benny takes the opportunity and takes out a knife from behind him and tries to attack Victor. But Victor is so clever that he catches Benny. However, Benny knew beforehand that he would not be able to defeat the vampires with his bare hands. So he takes the car key out of his pocket and turns it on, and then the car from outside hits the wall of Victor's house. Immediately, the wall breaks down, and the sunlight from outside directly enters the room. Since the sunlight falls on Joe, she burns to ashes there, but the clever Victor immediately hides in the dark corner of the room. Suddenly, Benny sees his brother John coming up. Benny runs to his brother, and Victor again drags John into the darkness. Seeing this, Benny quickly rushes to his brother, but then Victor catches Benny too, and he bites Benny's neck. Benny falls to the ground in pain. Victor is about to kill him, and just then John rushes and throws Victor into the sunlight with him, and Victor dies there. But Benny, who was injured by Victor's bite, was almost dying. Then Belair comes to him and cuts his hand and feeds Benny blood. As a result, Benny becomes a vampire. There was no other way to save Benny in that condition, so even knowing that he would become a vampire, Belair fed him blood. A few days later, Benny and John are seen sitting and talking in a restaurant. Then John says to his brother, "Our city has changed a lot from before, because there is no treaty between vampires and humans." Benny then says, "Don't worry, we will make the city as it was before, so that everyone can live freely." Then Benny gets up from there and leaves. And before leaving, he says to his brother, "I am leaving something for you under the table." After Benny leaves, John looks under the table and sees a bag full of money lying there. Then Belair comes to pick up Benny in a car. Actually, Benny and Belair are together now. And this is where the movie ends. So friends, don't forget to comment on how you liked today's explanation. Subscribe to the channel to get such new stories.